Last night, a Fox News clash exploded as Morgan Freeman unleashed a venomous attack on Donald Trump's marriage, only to be met with a fiery rebuke from White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. The studio crackled with hostility, setting the stage for a brutal showdown. The air in the Fox News studio was thick with anticipation as the cameras rolled on a primetime segment billed as a discussion on American values. Morgan Freeman, the 87-year-old Hollywood legend known for his commanding presence and iconic voice, sat across from Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old White House press secretary who had become a lightning rod for controversy in Trump's second term. The host, Laura Ingraham, barely had time to introduce the guests before Freeman launched into a blistering tirade. Donald Trump's marriage to Melania is a sham, a hollow performance for the cameras, Freeman declared, his voice dripping with disdain. The man's a narcissist who treats his wife like a prop, parading her around to mask his own insecurities. Everyone in America can see it. Their cold distance, the way Melania flinches at his touch. It's a marriage built on power, not love, and it's an insult to every honest couple in this country. His words landed like a grenade, the studio audience gasping as Ingram's eyes widened. Freeman's hatred for Trump, well documented in his outspoken criticism during the 2024 campaign, fueled the intensity of his attack. He leaned forward, his gaze unyielding, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Leavitt, however, was unfazed. Her youthful composure belied the steel in her spine as she adjusted her posture, her eyes locking onto Freeman's. Before she could respond, Freeman pivoted, turning his ire directly on her. "And you, Ms. Leavitt, you're nothing but Trump's puppet," he sneered, his voice cutting through the studio's tense silence. A 27-year-old mouthpiece with no real power, just parroting his lies to the American people. You're a prop too, a shiny distraction for his circus. Do you even have a thought of your own? Or does he pull all your strings? The audience erupted in murmurs, some cheering Freeman's audacity, others stunned by his personal attack. Ingram tried to interject, but Freeman waved her off, his contempt for Leavitt palpable. Leavitt's lips tightened, but her expression remained steady. She waited for the noise to die down, her silence commanding attention. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and confident, slicing through Freeman's venom. "Mr. Freeman, your assumptions about President Trump's marriage are as baseless as your attempt to diminish me," she said, her tone measured but firm. "Donald and Melania Trump share a partnership rooted in mutual respect, one that has endured decades of scrutiny and pressure that you, with all your Hollywood privilege, could never understand. As for me, I'm not here as anyone's puppet. I'm the voice of a White House that serves the American people. And I won't be lectured by someone who thinks a movie career qualifies them to judge my integrity." The audience roared, some clapping, others shouting, as the studio became a cauldron of emotion. Freeman's face darkened, his jaw clenching as Leavitt's words hit their mark. Ingram, sensing the escalating tension, leaned in. "Let's keep this civil, folks," she said, though her eyes gleamed with the thrill of the confrontation. Leavitt's defense of Trump's marriage had shifted the dynamic, but Freeman wasn't done. He leaned back, a bitter smile curling his lips, as if preparing to unleash something even more incendiary. "You think you can sit there and lecture me about integrity?" Freeman shot back, his voice rising. "I've seen your kind before, young and ambitious, selling your soul for a seat at Trump's table. You're not fooling anyone." The accusation hung in the air, a challenge that demanded a response. Leavitt's eyes flashed with defiance, and it was clear she was ready to escalate the fight. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter, the audience holding its breath, as the clash teetered on the edge of chaos. Morgan Freeman's words echoed in the charged silence, his accusation of Karoline Leavitt's ambition cutting deeper than any policy critique could. The Fox News studio, alive with the hum of anticipation, felt like a pressure cooker ready to burst. Leavitt's defiant stare met Freeman's unyielding glare, and for a moment, The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, locked in a battle of wills. "You talk about integrity, Mr. Freeman," Leavitt began, her voice steady but laced with an edge that silenced the restless crowd. "But let's talk about yours. You sit there, cloaked in your Hollywood pedestal, throwing stones at a marriage you know nothing about, at a president who's fought for this country, and at me for daring to stand up for what I believe in. If that's your idea of integrity, then it's as hollow as the roles you play on screen." The audience gasped, a ripple of shock spreading through the room. Leavitt's counterattack was surgical, turning Freeman's celebrity status into a weapon against him. Laura Ingram's eyebrows shot up, her attempt to steer the conversation forgotten as the confrontation took on a life of its own. Freeman's face twisted, his composure cracking under the weight of Leavitt's words. "Don't you dare compare your blind loyalty to my career," he snapped, his voice booming with barely contained fury. "I've spent decades earning my place, speaking truth to power, while you're just a kid playing dress-up in the White House, reading scripts written by a man who'd sell this country for a headline." His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles whitening as he leaned forward, his presence as commanding as ever but now tinged with raw anger. The audience was split, some cheering Freeman's passion, others murmuring in support of Leavitt's poise. Leavitt didn't flinch. She leaned in, her voice rising to match his intensity. "You call it loyalty? I call it duty," she fired back. "I serve the American people, not a studio audience. And let's be clear, your truth is just a narrative you've sold to millions, packaged in a voice that makes people listen. But here, in this moment, your words don't scare me, and they don't change the facts. President Trump and Melania have a bond forged in resilience, one that's survived more than your insults ever could." Her words were a rallying cry, and the conservative-leaning crowd erupted in applause, their cheers drowning out Freeman's attempt to interrupt. Ingram, sensing the need to regain control, interjected. "Let's focus on the issues here," she said, but her voice was nearly lost in the uproar. Freeman, undeterred, waved her off, his eyes never leaving Leavitt. "You think you're tough, don't you?" he said, his tone low and venomous. "You think you can stand there and defend a man who's made a mockery of this nation? You're not just a puppet, you're a fool, and the whole world sees it." The personal jab landed hard, and for a split second Leavitt's expression flickered, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her armor. The audience sensed it, their murmurs growing louder as Freeman pressed his advantage. But Leavitt recovered, quickly, her resolve hardening. "The only fool here is the one who thinks anger is an argument," she retorted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. "You've spent this entire segment attacking me, attacking President Trump, attacking his family. But you haven't offered a single solution, a single idea for this country. That's not truth, Mr. Freeman. That's just noise." The studio exploded again, the crowd's energy fueling Leavitt's momentum. Freeman's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with frustration as he realized he was losing ground. Ingram tried once more to steer the conversation, but the clash was beyond her control. Freeman, his patience fraying, slammed his hand on the table, the sound reverberating through the studio. "You don't get to lecture me about solutions," he roared, his voice shaking with rage. "I've seen this country torn apart by men like Trump, and I won't sit here and let you sanitize his chaos." The audience was on edge, the tension palpable, as Leavitt prepared to respond, her eyes blazing with a fire that promised an even fiercer comeback. The echo of Morgan Freeman's hand slamming the table lingered, a stark punctuation to his furious outburst. The Fox News studio was a powder keg, the audience's murmurs swelling into a restless hum as Karoline Leavitt's piercing gaze held Freeman in a silent challenge. Laura Ingram's pleas for order were drowned out by the electric tension, the cameras capturing every micro-expression of the two combatants. Freeman's rage was a tangible force, but Leavitt's fiery resolve signaled she was ready to turn the tide. Sanitize chaos? Leavitt said, her voice low but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. Mr. Freeman, the only chaos here is the one you're creating with your baseless attacks. You claim to speak for a torn-apart country, but all I hear is a man so blinded by his hatred for President Trump that he's forgotten how to reason. The audience erupted. A wave of cheers from Trump supporters mingling with jeers from Freeman's defenders. Leavitt's words were a calculated strike, framing Freeman's anger as a liability rather than a virtue. Her youth, often wielded against her, became a strength as she projected unshakable confidence. Freeman's eyes narrowed, his chest heaving, as he fought to regain control. "You think you can twist this around?" he growled, his voice rough with indignation. "I've lived through more history than you've read about, and I've seen what men like Trump do to nations. He's a divider, a con man who's turned his marriage into a stage prop and this country into a circus. And you're complicit, standing there with your rehearsed lines, pretending you're anything more than his errand girl." The personal slight drew sharp gasps from the crowd, the insult cutting deeper as Freeman's tone dripped with condescension. Ingram's hand hovered as if to intervene, but the moment was too raw, too riveting. Leavitt's jaw tightened, but her response was swift and searing. "You keep calling me a girl, Mr. Freeman, as if that diminishes me," she said, her voice rising with controlled fury. "But I'm the White House press secretary, chosen to represent millions of Americans who believe in President Trump's vision. You can mock me, you can mock him, you can mock his marriage, but you can't mock the will of the people who elected him. Melania Trump is a woman of grace and strength, a partner who stood by him through storms you've only narrated in movies. Your disdain doesn't change that truth." The studio shook with applause, the conservative crowd roaring as Leavitt's defense of Melania struck a chord. Freeman's face contorted, his frustration boiling over. "The will of the people?" he shouted, his voice cracking with exasperation. "The people deserve better than a reality TV star and his enablers. You're not a representative, you're a shield for his lies, and you're too naive to see it." His words were a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative, but they only fueled the crowd's fervor for Leavitt. Her calm under fire was unraveling his attack, and he knew it. The audience sensed the shift, their cheers growing louder, drowning out Freeman's protests. Ingram, finally seizing a moment, tried to pivot. "Let's talk policy, can we?" she urged, but her voice was a whisper against the storm. Leavitt, undeterred, leaned forward, her eyes locked on Freeman. "You call me naive, but I see through you," she said, her tone icy. "You're not here to debate policy or solutions. You're here to tear down a man you hate, and you'll drag anyone down with him, including me. But I'm not going anywhere, and neither is President Trump." The crowd's roar was deafening, a tidal wave of support that seemed to physically push Freeman back in his seat. Freeman's hands trembled, his composure shattered. "You're delusional," he spat, his voice hoarse. "This whole charade, this blind devotion, it's going to crash down, and you'll be left with nothing." The accusation was a final, desperate lunge, but it lacked the force of his earlier attacks. Leavitt's relentless counters had exposed his anger as a weakness, and the audience's energy was firmly with her. As she prepared to deliver her next blow, the studio lights seemed to spotlight her alone, the moment poised for a decisive turn. The Fox News studio was a crucible of raw emotion, Morgan Freeman's trembling hands and hoarse accusation hanging in the air like smoke after a blast. Karoline Leavitt, illuminated by the studio lights, stood as the focal point of a captivated audience, her presence commanding despite her youth. Freeman's desperate claim that her devotion to Trump would leave her with nothing had faltered, his once powerful voice now a shadow of its former strength. The crowd's energy surged toward Leavitt, their cheers a roaring tide that drowned out his fading momentum. She inhaled sharply, ready to deliver the final strike in a confrontation that had gripped the nation. "Crash down?" Leavitt said, her voice steady but laced with a fierce conviction that silenced the room. "The only thing crashing tonight, Mr. Freeman, is your attempt to rewrite reality. You've spent this entire segment hurling insults, questioning my integrity, and slandering a marriage you've never understood. But here's the truth you can't escape. President Trump and Melania are a united front. Their bond stronger than your bitterness. And me? I'm not here for fame or headlines. I'm here for the Americans who believe in a future you've dismissed with your cynicism." The audience exploded, their applause a thunderous wave that shook the studio. Leavitt's words were a clarion call, her defense of Trump and Melania resonating with a crowd hungry for resolve. Freeman's face was a mask of fury, his eyes blazing but his body slumping, as if the weight of Leavitt's relentless counters had physically drained him. "You're a fool," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. "You're all fools for believing in him." But the words lacked conviction, a final gasp from a man who had lost the room. Laura Ingraham, sensing the shift, tried to interject. "Let's wrap this up," she said. Her tone strained, but Leavitt wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing Freeman's fading defiance. "You can call me a fool, but I'm not the one clinging to hatred instead of hope," Leavitt said, her voice rising with unshakable clarity. "You've built a career on telling stories. But tonight you've told lies about a president, his wife, and the people who support them. I stand here for millions who see through your narrative, who know that President Trump and Melania's marriage is a testament to loyalty, not a prop for your scorn. You've lost this fight, Mr. Freeman, not because I'm louder, but because you've got nothing left but anger." The studio erupted again, the crowd on its feet, their cheers a deafening endorsement of Leavitt's triumph. Freeman's hands clenched into fists, his jaw trembling as he struggled to respond. "This isn't over," he snarled, but his voice cracked, betraying his defeat. The audience's energy was a wall he couldn't breach, and Leavitt's unyielding poise had stripped him of his authority. Ingraham, now desperate to regain control, raised her voice. "We're out of time," she shouted, but Freeman was already moving. He shoved his chair back, the screech of metal against the floor cutting through the noise. "I'm done with this circus," he spat, ripping off his microphone and storming toward the studio exit. The audience gasped, some booing, others cheering, as Freeman's silhouette vanished into the shadows of the set. His departure a stark admission of defeat. Leavitt remained seated, her expression calm but triumphant, as the crowd's applause washed over her. Ingraham, flustered, turned to the camera. "Well, that was something," she said, forcing a smile. "We'll be right back after this." But the cameras lingered on Leavitt, her steady gaze a symbol of a new conservative force. The studio lights dimmed, but the energy remained electric, the confrontation already rippling beyond the broadcast. Social media lit up with clips of Leavitt's fierce defense, her name trending as a conservative icon, while Freeman's outburst drew scrutiny, his reputation bruised by a battle he couldn't win. The clash had not just been a debate, but a turning point, a moment where a young press secretary reshaped the narrative, leaving an indelible mark on a divided nation.